Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight. We're going to take a journey together. A long journey. A slow journey. The kind of journey that has no dramatic moments, no exciting turns, no unexpected revelations. Just movement. Just process. Just the patient, methodical way things actually happened in the ancient world. Tonight, we're going to follow grain, wheat to be specific. From the moment it's planted in Egyptian soil to the moment it becomes bread in a Roman home. Every step, every delay, every mundane detail. This isn't the history of emperors. It's not about battles or politics or grand architectural achievements. This is the history of the everyday, the routine, the things that happen so regularly, so predictably, that ancient people barely thought about them. And yet, in many ways, this is the most important history of all, because this is what sustained Rome. Not the legions, not the aqueducts, not the Senate debates. The grain, the constant reliable flow of grain from Egypt to Rome, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. The Romans called it the annona, the supply. It was managed by dedicated officials, transported by professional sailors, stored in purpose-built warehouses, and distributed according to carefully maintained lists. It was a bureaucratic marvel, and it was also completely, wonderfully boring. So settle in, get comfortable. We're going to take our time with this. We're going to move at the pace the grain moved. We're going to wait when the grain waited. We're going to follow every small step, every minor delay, every routine procedure. There's something calming about this kind of history, about understanding how things actually worked, about seeing the patience required for everyday life in the ancient world. Everything took time. Everything required multiple hands, multiple steps, multiple days or weeks of waiting. We begin, as all grain begins, in the soil, in a field in Egypt. In the Nile Delta, where the same families had been growing wheat in the same way for thousands of years, where the rhythms of planting and harvest were as predictable as the flood itself. Let's go there now. Let's stand in that field on a November morning as the planting begins. The field is quiet this morning. The sun has just risen over the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the dark soil. The field stretches out, perhaps 5 acres in total, bounded by low earthen berms that separate it from the neighboring plots. Everything is still damp from the Nile's annual flood, which receded only weeks ago. The soil is black. Not brown like the soil in most places, but genuinely black, rich with the silt deposited by the floodwaters. If you were to pick up a handful of this soil, it would feel cool and slightly sticky. It would smell of water and minerals. It would clump together when squeezed, then crumble when you opened your hand. This is some of the most fertile soil in the ancient world. Perhaps in any world. The Nile's floods have been enriching this land for so long that the soil is deep and dark and almost impossibly rich in nutrients. Our farmer's name is Hori. He's 42 years old, though age is somewhat approximate in this time and place. He's of average height, lean from a lifetime of farm work, with skin darkened by years under the Egyptian sun. His hands are calloused. His back sometimes aches. But he knows this work. He's been doing it since he was a boy, learning from his father, who learned from his father before that. Hori stands at the edge of his field, looking out across it. He does this every year before planting. Just stands and looks. He's checking the field, yes, seeing how the floodwaters have redistributed the soil, noting any new depressions or raised areas. But he's also just taking it in. This is his field, his family's field, the source of their livelihood. He's wearing a simple linen kilt, bleached white by sun and washing, though it's stained with old dirt marks that never quite come out. His feet are bare. Most Egyptian farmers work barefoot. Sandals are for town, not for fields. His head is uncovered, though later in the day, when the sun is high, he'll wrap a cloth around it for protection. Behind him, his son. His name is Kenti. He's 15. Is preparing the seed grain. The seed is stored in large clay jars in a small mud brick structure at the edge of the field. Kenti is scooping the grain out of these jars and pouring it into woven baskets. The grain makes a soft rustling sound as it pours, kernel after kernel tumbling against each other. The grain itself is emmer wheat, Triticum dicoccum. Each kernel is slightly smaller than modern wheat, more elongated, wrapped in a tough outer husk. The kernels are a warm brownish gold color. They feel hard when you roll them between your fingers. They smell faintly nutty, faintly earthy. Hori has already walked his field once this morning, before sunrise, checking that the soil is ready. Not too wet. That would make planting difficult and could cause seeds to rot. Not too dry. The seeds need moisture to germinate. The soil is just right. Damp, but not waterlogged. Cool the hull, but beginning to warm as the sun rises higher. Now he picks up one of the baskets of seed grain. The basket is woven from palm fronds, sturdy but flexible. It's perhaps 2 feet across, shallow enough that Hori can easily reach into it. The grain fills it about 3/4 full. Any fuller, and it would be too heavy to carry comfortably all day. Hori steps onto the field. His feet sink slightly into the soft soil. Not deep, maybe 1/2 inch. Enough to leave clear footprints. He begins to walk across the field in a straight line, or as straight as he can judge by eye. There are no markers, no guide ropes, just his own sense of spacing, honed by years of practice. As he walks, he reaches into the basket with his right hand. His hand closes around a generous handful of grain kernels. Perhaps 50 or 60 kernels in his palm. He can feel their weight, their hardness, their slight roughness. Then, with a practiced motion, he swings his arm forward and out, opening his hand as he does so. The grain sprays out in an arc. The kernels tumble through the air, catching the morning sunlight for a moment before falling to the soil. Some land near his feet. Some land 6 or 7 feet away. They scatter across the dark earth, 100 individual kernels finding 100 individual resting places. He takes another step, another handful, another broadcast arc. The motion is rhythmic, smooth. He's not thinking about each individual action anymore. His body knows what to do. Step, reach, grab, swing, release, step, reach, grab, swing and release. The sound of the kernels hitting the soil is very soft, almost inaudible. Just a gentle pattering like the lightest rain, but multiplied across hundreds of handfuls. Across the whole field, it creates a subtle soundtrack to the morning's work. Behind Hori, About 20 feet back comes Kenty with the plough. It's a simple plough made of wood, with a bronze ploughshare at the tip. 2 oxen pull it, both of them reddish-brown, with long curved horns and patient dark eyes. The oxen are yoked together with a wooden yoke that rests across their shoulders. They're used to this work. They've been ploughing this field every November for years. Kenty doesn't need to guide them much, so they know to walk in relatively straight lines. They know to turn at the end of each row. Kenty mostly just walks beside them, occasionally calling out a soft word of encouragement or correction. The oxen respond to his voice more than to any physical guidance. The plough cuts a shallow furrow through the soil, perhaps 3 or 4 inches deep. The ploughshare parts the soil, and the earth folds over behind it, covering most of the scattered grain kernels. Not all of them. Some kernels remain visible on the surface, but most are now buried just beneath that layer of dark soil. The furrow isn't perfectly straight. It wavers a bit, following the oxen's path, which itself wavers based on the slight variations in the ground. But it doesn't need to be perfect. The wheat will grow just fine in slightly wavy rows. This is how the morning passes. Hori walks ahead, broadcasting seed. Kenty follows with the oxen and plough, covering the seed. They work in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional word to the oxen, the soft sound of grain scattering, the steady crunch of the plough through soil. By mid-morning, they've planted perhaps half an acre. They stop for a break. Kenty unhitches the oxen and leads them to the edge of the field, where there's a stone trough filled with water. The oxen drink deeply, their sides heaving slightly from the exertion. They're not exhausted. This isn't particularly hard work for them. But they're ready for a rest. Hori and Kenty sit in the shade of a date palm at the field's edge. Hori's wife, her name is Merit, has brought them bread and beer. The bread is flat, coarse, made from last month's grain ration. The beer is thick, slightly sweet, low in alcohol. It's more food than drink, really, made from partially germinated barley, baked into cakes, and then crumbled into water to ferment. They eat without much conversation. The bread is filling. The beer is refreshing. After perhaps 20 minutes, Hori stands. Time to return to work. There's still half the field to plant, and the afternoon will grow hot. The afternoon proceeds much like the morning. Walk, broadcast seed. The oxen follow, pulling the plough. Furrow after furrow, row after row. The sun climbs higher, then begins its descent toward the western horizon. The field slowly transforms from blank dark earth to planted rows. By late afternoon, as the sun is getting low, the planting is complete. Every section of the field has been seeded. Hori walks the perimeter one more time, checking for any spots he might have missed. There are a few thin areas, and he broadcasts a little extra seed there by hand. Then he's satisfied. Kenty leads the oxen back to their small shelter near the family's house. He removes their yoke, checks their hooves for any stones or injuries, and gives them hay to eat. The oxen settle down, chewing contentedly. They've done their part. The planted field sits quietly whilst darkness falls. The grain is in the soil now. The first step is complete, but there's nothing more to do except wait. Wait for the grain to sprout. Wait for the wheat to grow. Wait for the slow progression of the season. And wait they do. The days pass. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The weather is mild. Egyptian winters are gentle compared to winters farther north. Cool nights, warm days, occasional light rain which is welcome. About 2 weeks after planting, Hori walks his field one morning and notices the first hints of grain. The wheat is germinating. Tiny shoots, barely visible unless you're looking for them. Little spears of green pushing up through the dark soil. Over the following weeks, the green becomes more obvious. The shoots grow taller. First just an inch high, then 2 inches, then 3. The field slowly transforms from dark earth to a carpet of green. It's a gradual change, nothing dramatic about it, just steady, patient growth. Hori checks the field every few days. There's not much to do. The wheat is growing on its own, drawing nutrients from that rich Nile silt, drawing moisture from the soil and from the occasional winter rains. But Hori likes to walk through the field, to see how the growth is progressing, to check for any problems. Sometimes he pulls a few weeds, though not many weeds grow in the winter. Sometimes he shoos away birds that are picking at the seeds. Once, he notices a small section where the growth seems thinner, and he makes a mental note that this area might need extra attention next year. Mostly, though, he just waits and watches. By late winter, the wheat is knee-high. The field is a solid expanse of green now, moving gently when the wind blows across it. The individual plants are thick with leaves, and the first signs of the grain heads are beginning to form at the top of each stalk. The season progresses. The wheat grows taller. Knee-high becomes thigh-high. Thigh-high becomes waist-high. The green color starts to shift, taking on a yellowish tinge. The grain heads grow fuller, heavier. When Hori walks through the field now, he can hear the soft rustling of the wheat stalks brushing against each other and against his legs. In early spring, let's say it's March, Hori checks the wheat more frequently. He's looking for that moment when it's ready to harvest. Too early, and the grain will be too soft. Too late, and some might shatter from the heads or be eaten by birds. He pulls a few heads of grain and rubs them between his palms, blowing away the chaff. The kernels are still slightly soft. Not ready yet. He checks again a week later. Still a bit soft. He waits. Finally, in mid-March, he checks again. This time, when he rubs the grain heads between his palms, the kernels feel harder, drier. He bites one experimentally. It cracks under his teeth rather than squishing. This is the sign. The wheat is ready. The harvest will begin tomorrow. Hori spreads word to his neighbors and to the workers he's hired for harvest. Tomorrow at dawn, they'll begin cutting. Tonight, he sharpens his sickle on a whetstone, the bronze blade making a soft ringing sound as it slides across the stone. The blade needs to be sharp. Dull tools make harvest take much longer. The field waits, golden under the setting sun, ready to give up its grains. The sky is just beginning to lighten in the east, that deep blue fading to pale grey at the horizon, when the workers begin to arrive at Hori's field. There are perhaps 20 people in total. Some are Hori's family. His wife Merit, his son Kenti, his brother and his brother's wife. Others are neighbors, helping with the understanding that Hori will help with their harvests in turn. A few are hired workers, men and women who travel from farm to farm during harvest season, working for payment in grain or in copper. everyone carries a sickle. These are small tools, easy to hold in one hand. The blade is bronze, curved like a crescent moon, perhaps 8 inches long. The handle is wood, worn smooth by years of use. Each person's sickle is their own tool, maintained and sharpened to their own preference. The workers spread out along one edge of the field. They'll work as a line, moving across the field together. There's an informal social structure to where people position themselves. The more experienced harvesters take the center positions. The less experienced, younger workers, those new to harvest work, take positions at the ends where it's easier to keep up. Hori gives no formal signal to begin. As the sun breaks over the horizon, sending the first rays of direct light across the golden wheat, people simply start working. The harvest has begun. The technique is simple but requires practice to do efficiently. The harvester reaches out with their free hand and grabs a bunch of wheat stalks. Not too many, perhaps 20 or 30 stalks in a handful. The number depends on how thick the wheat is growing and how strong the person's grip is. Too many stalks, and it's hard to cut through cleanly. Too few, and the work takes forever. With the wheat stalks gripped firmly in the left hand, most of these workers are right-handed. The harvester swings the sickle in a smooth arc, cutting through the stalks about 8 inches above the ground. The sickle's sharp edge slices through the hollow stems easily. The sound is a soft crunch, almost a whisper. The cut bundle is laid on the ground behind the harvester. They'll come back for it later. For now, the focus is just on cutting. Grab, cut, lay down, grab, cut, lay down. The motion becomes rhythmic, almost meditative. The harvesters move forward slowly, step by step, as the line of standing wheat recedes and the line of cut wheat grows. The work is not particularly strenuous, but it's steady and it requires concentration. It's easy to cut yourself with the sickle if you're not careful. The repetitive motion of bending, grabbing, cutting begins to make backs ache after a while. But the workers are experienced. They know how to pace themselves. This is the first day of what will be several days of harvesting. The sun climbs higher. The air grows warmer. By mid-morning, it's genuinely hot. The workers are sweating now. Some have wrapped cloths around their heads for protection from the sun. They work in silence mostly, or with occasional brief exchanges. Watch that spot. The wheat's thicker there. How's your back holding up? Good rhythm in today. Around mid-morning, work pauses for a break. Merritt has brought water jars and sets them out at the field's edge. The workers come in from the field, moving stiffly from hours of bending and cutting. They drink deeply. The water is lukewarm, but welcome. There's bread too, and some onions. Simple food, but satisfying. The workers sit in whatever shade they can find, under the date palms at the field's edge, in the shadow of the small storage building. They rest for perhaps 20 minutes, then return to work. The afternoon proceeds like the morning. Grab, cut, lay down, grab, cut, lay down. The line of harvesters moves slowly across the field. The standing wheat diminishes. The cut wheat accumulates in neat bundles across the harvested sections. By late afternoon, as the sun is getting low, perhaps a third of the field has been cut. That's good progress for the first day. The workers will return tomorrow and continue. The harvest will take 3 or 4 days at this pace. As dusk approaches, the workers gather their tools and head home. Hori walks through the partially harvested field one more time. The cut wheat lies where it fell, drying in the evening air. He's satisfied with the day's progress. Tomorrow, they'll continue. The pattern repeats over the following days. Early morning arrival. Hours of steady cutting. Midday break. More cutting. By the third day, the entire field has been harvested. The wheat lies in bundles across the field, the stalks now a deeper gold, drying in the spring sun. But the work is far from over. The wheat must be gathered, transported to the threshing floor, threshed, and winnowed. These steps will take longer than the cutting did. The gathering begins the next day. Workers move through the field with large baskets, collecting the bundles of cut wheat. Each bundle is grasped by the cut ends. The stalks themselves, not the grain heads which could shatter and lose grain. The bundles are piled into the baskets until the baskets are full but not overflowing. The loaded baskets are carried to Hori's threshing floor. This is a circular area near the field, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, where the ground has been packed hard and flat over years of use. The baskets of wheat are emptied onto this floor. The bundles spread out in a layer about 6 inches deep. Once a good layer of wheat covers the threshing floor, the actual threshing begins. Hori leads his 2 oxen onto the floor. The oxen walk onto the wheat stalks, their hooves making soft crunching sounds. Kenti walks beside them with a stick, gently guiding them to walk in circles. Around and around they go. The oxen's hooves pound on the wheat, crushing the stalks, breaking them up, loosening the grain from the heads. The sound is a constant soft crunching, punctuated by the occasional snort from the oxen and the soft calls from Kenti guiding them. This is not quick work. The oxen walk for an hour. Then the workers use wooden pitchforks to turn the wheat, bringing the bottom layer to the top. The oxen walk again, treading over the freshly turned stalks. More crunching, more crushing, more grain shaking loose. The process repeats multiple times. Walk the oxen, turn the wheat, walk the oxen again. By the end of the first day of threshing, the wheat stalks are thoroughly broken up far. The grain has mostly separated from the heads. But it's all mixed together. Grain, chaff, broken pieces of stalk, dust. The mixture sits on the threshing floor overnight, continuing to dry. The next day, the winnowing begins. For this, Hori needs wind. Fortunately, there's a steady breeze blowing from the north this morning. Perfect. Winnowing requires simple tools and practice technique. The workers use wooden winnowing fans, essentially large, flat baskets with slightly raised edges. A worker scoops up some of the threshed wheat mixture with the fan, filling it perhaps a third full. Then, with a smooth motion, they toss the mixture up into the air. The heavier grain kernels fall relatively straight down, landing in a pile on the threshing floor. The lighter chaff, the bits of broken stalk, the papery husks from around the grain heads, the dust, is caught by the wind and blown away from the Bakeries. The chaff drifts across the threshing floor and beyond, settling in the surrounding area where it will eventually decompose or be gathered for animal bedding. Scoop. Toss. The grain falls. The chaff blows away. Scoop. Toss. Grain falls. Chaff blows away. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The workers develop a steady rhythm, working in turns so no one gets too tired. The pile of clean grain slowly grows. But even after winnowing, the grain isn't completely clean. Emma wheat has tough husks that cling to each kernel. These won't blow away in the wind. They need to be removed by pounding. Some farmers do this immediately. Hori prefers to do a preliminary pounding now and then, more thorough processing later, closer to when the grain will actually be used or sold. For the preliminary pounding, he has a large stone mortar, a bowl carved into a boulder near his house, and several wooden pestles. Workers take turns. Scoop some grain into the mortar, pound it with the pestle. Not too hard, just enough to crack and loosen the husks. Then winnow again to remove the loosened husks. Pound, winnow, the pile of fully cleaned grain grows slowly. This is the most tedious part of the entire process. It requires patience and attention. Pound too hard and you might break the kernels. Pound too gently and the husks won't loosen. Each worker develops their own rhythm, their own feel for how hard to pound. This work continues for several days. By the end, Hori has a substantial pile of cleaned wheat. Now comes the measuring. He brings out his measuring containers. Standardized vessels called modia are. A modius is a cylindrical container, about 8.5 liters in volume. It's made of wood, with a flat bottom and straight sides. Hori scoops grain into the modius, filling it to the brim. Then he uses a flat stick to level off the top, scraping away any grain that's piled above the randon. The level modius is then poured into a large storage jar. He makes a mark on a piece of pottery to keep count. 1 modius, 2, 3, 4. He continues counting until all the grain is measured. This year's harvest from this field totals about 600 modiai. That's respectable. Not an exceptional harvest, but solid. Better than last year, actually, when the yield was only about 520 modiai. Hori has to keep some grain for his family's use, perhaps 80 modi for the year. Some will be saved as seed for next year's planting, perhaps 60 modi. The rest is his to sell or to pay in taxes. And speaking of taxes, the tax collector arrives right on schedule. The collector is a middle-aged man in a clean linen kilt, accompanied by 2 assistants and a scribe. He's not particularly friendly, but he's not hostile either. This is simply business. He checks his papyrus records, confirming Hori's landholding and the expected tax obligation. For a field of this size, the tax is perhaps 200 modi of grain. Hori measures out the required amount under the collector's watchful eye. The scribe makes notes on a wax tablet, recording the payment. The grain is loaded into sacks, large fabric sacks that can hold about 8 modier each. The sacks are stamped with the official seal, marking them as tax grain destined for the imperial grain supply. These sacks are loaded onto a donkey cart. The collector and his assistants move on to the next farm. The cart, when full, will head to a collection point on the Nile. And from there our grain's long journey truly begins. The collection point is located about 2 miles from Hori's field, at a small dock on one of the Nile's many channels in the delta. It's not a town, exactly, more of a way station. There's a warehouse, a dock, a few small buildings for officials and workers. And that's about it. The cart arrives at the warehouse in the afternoon. The building is made of mud brick, with thick walls and a reed-thatched roof. The walls are thick for a reason. They provide insulation, keeping the interior cooler than the outside air. This is important for grain storage. The warehouse door is wide, designed to allow carts to pull right up to it. Workers approach the cart and begin unloading the sacks. Each sack is carried into the warehouse. They're heavy, about 100 pounds each, awkward to carry. The workers are strong and experienced, but even so, they carry the sacks carefully, mindful of their weight and bulk. Inside the warehouse, the air is noticeably cooler. The light is dim, coming only from the door and a few small openings near the ceiling. It takes a moment for eyes to adjust. The floor is packed earth, swept clean. The interior space is large, perhaps 60 feet long and 30 feet wide. Sacks of grain are already stacked along the walls and in rows down the center of the building. The new sacks are added to these stacks. Workers place them carefully, making sure the stacks are stable. Each sack is positioned so it won't shift or fall. The warehouse master, a man who's held this position for 12 years, watches the unloading. He's responsible for tracking everything that enters and leaves this warehouse. When the cart is empty, he approaches with a wax tablet and makes notation. 8 sacks. Approximately 200 modii. From Hori's farm in the Western District. The notation is careful and precise. The warehouse master knows that his records will be checked against records kept elsewhere. Any discrepancies will fall on him to explain. So he's meticulous. He counts carefully. He measures when there's any doubt. He makes clear marks on his tablet. The grain sits in the warehouse. Days pass. More carts arrive. More sacks are added. The warehouse master walks through the building every day, checking on the grain. He's looking for several things. Any signs of moisture on the sacks? Moisture means the grain inside might be getting damp, which could lead to mold or sprouting. Any signs of rodent activity? Droppings, gnawed fabric, scattered grain. Any signs that the stacks are shifting or becoming unstable? The warehouse has cats for the rodent problem. 3 lean, efficient mouses that prowl the spaces between the grain sacks. The cats are fed, but not too well. Hungry cats are better mouses. They sleep during the heat of the day and hunt at night when the mice are most active. The warehouse master considers them essential personnel. A week passes. The warehouse is perhaps half full now. The master decides it's time to arrange for river transport. He sends a message downstream requesting a boat. The message goes with a courier in a small fast boat. The courier will reach the main river port in half a day and deliver the message. 3 days later, a riverboat appears, coming upstream. The boat is large, as river vessels go, about 60 feet long and 15 feet wide. It has a single mast with a furled sail. Right now, with the boat coming upstream, the sail is raised and catching the north wind that typically blows up the Nile. The boat also has oars, 8 of them, 4 on each side, for times when the wind isn't favorable. The boat pulls up to the dock. The crew, the boat master and 5 sailors, secure the mooring lines. The boat master goes to meet with the warehouse master. They know each other. They've done this transaction many times before. They discuss the grain, the quantity, the destination. Everything is agreed upon quickly. The loading will begin at dawn tomorrow. That night, the boat crew sleeps aboard their vessel, tied up at the dock. The boat rocks gently with the slight current and the small waves caused by wind. The crew is used to this motion. They sleep soundly. Dawn comes. The loading begins. Workers form a human chain from the warehouse to the boat. The sacks are passed from hand to hand, from the dim interior of the warehouse to the bright morning sunlight, across the dock onto the boat. At the boat, sailors receive the sacks and carry them down into the hold. The hold is the lower interior of the boat, below the deck. It's dark down there and warm. The sailors stack the sacks carefully. The boatmaster comes down periodically to check their work. He's very particular about weight distribution. Too much weight on one side and the boat will list. Too much weight toward the bow or stern, and the boat won't handle properly. The weight must be evenly distributed. The loading takes all day, sack after sack, hand after hand. The pile in the warehouse diminishes. The hold of the boat fills. By late afternoon, the boat is loaded. The hold is full, the hatch is secured, and the boat sits noticeably lower in the water under the weight of its cargo. The boatmaster checks his paperwork one final time with the warehouse master. Both men sign or mark the documents. The boatmaster keeps one copy. The warehouse master keeps another. A third copy will travel separately by courier, so records at the destination can expect this shipment. It's too late in the day to depart, so the boat will leave at dawn. The crew makes a final check of the vessel. Ropes are coiled properly. The sail is examined for any worn spots or tears. Oars are secured in their locks. Everything is ready. Morning arrives. The crew rises early as sailors do. They eat a quick breakfast. Bread, dried fish, some dates. The boatmaster checks the wind. It's blowing from the north, as it usually does. Perfect for a downriver journey. They won't need the sail much. The current will do most of the work. But it's good to have the wind with them rather than against them. The mooring lines are untied. Two sailors use poles to push the boat away from the dock. The current catches it immediately, and the boat begins to drift downstream. The boatmaster takes his position at the steering oar. A large oar mounted at the stern, used to guide the vessel. The other sailors settle into their positions, ready to adjust the sail or take up oars if needed. The Nile moves slowly here in the delta, perhaps 2 or 3 miles per hour. The boat drifts with the current, moving just slightly faster than the water itself. The steering oar makes small corrections, keeping the boat in the deepest part of the channel where the current is strongest. The landscape slides by slowly. Fields on both banks, the rich dark soil of the delta contrasting with the lighter colors of desert up farther from the river. Palm trees scattered along the banks. Small villages every few miles, clusters of mud brick buildings. Other boats, some tied up at docks, others moving on the river like this one. The crew doesn't have much to do during this easy travel. One man stays at the steering oar, making minor adjustments. The others rest or perform light maintenance, checking ropes, retying knots, occasionally checking the cargo hatch to make sure it's secure. They talk quietly among themselves, telling stories, joking, or simply sitting in companionable silence. The sun rises higher. The day grows warm. The boat drifts on. More fields, more palm trees, another village. The rhythm is peaceful, almost meditative. The sound of water against the hull, the creak of wood, the occasional call of a bird. Around midday, the crew eats. They don't stop or tie up. The boat keeps moving while they eat. The food is simple. More bread, more dried fish, onions, beer in clay jars. They eat efficiently, knowing there will be another meal in the evening. The afternoon passes like the morning. The boat continues its slow drift downstream. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. The temperature moderates slightly as the afternoon wanes. As dusk approaches, the boatmaster begins looking for a place to stop for the night. He's done this journey dozens of times and knows the good spots. There, a quiet inlet, protected from the main current, with a sandy bottom for the anchor. He guides the boat toward it. The sail is lowered. An anchor, a large stone tied to a rope, is lowered over the side until it touches bottom. The boat swings slowly on its anchor rope until it's pointing into the current. The crew makes dinner. A simple stew made in a pot over a small brazier. More bread. More beer. As darkness falls completely, the crew settles down to sleep. Some sleep on the deck, wrapped in blankets. Others sleep in the small sheltered area at the stern. The night is mild, and sleeping under the stars is pleasant. The boat rocks gently with the slight waves and current. The water laps against the hull with a soft, rhythmic sound. Morning comes, the anchor is raised. The journey continues. More fields, more villages, more slow, steady drifting. Day 2 of the journey looks much like day 1, and day 3 will look much like day 2. This is the nature of a river travel: slow, steady, repetitive. The landscape changes gradually, but the activity aboard the boat remains constant. Drift with the current. Steer to stay in the channel. Stop at night. Resume in the morning. On the 4th day, the delta begins to widen. The channels branch and rejoin. The boatmaster pays more attention now, making sure he's following the correct branch. He knows this section well, but it's still important to stay alert. Take the wrong channel, and you might end up miles off course. Other river traffic becomes more common. More boats heading downstream with cargo. Boats heading upstream, their crews working hard at the oars or waiting for favorable winds. Fishing boats, smaller and more maneuverable. The occasional administrative vessel carrying officials on a government business. The boatmaster guides his vessel carefully through the traffic. Boats pass close sometimes, close enough that the crews can call out to each other. Greetings are exchanged. News is shared. How's the weather upstream? Any sandbars in the main channel? Safe travels. On the 5th day, buildings begin to appear more frequently on the shore. The villages grow larger, closer together. The delta is densely populated here, closer to the coast. More boats crowd the river. The water itself seems busier. And then, on the 6th day of travel, the distinctive outline of Alexandria appears on the horizon. Even from a distance, it's impressive. A city of considerable size, sprawling along the coastline. Buildings of white limestone, columns, temples, and towering above everything, the famous Pharos lighthouse. But the boat isn't heading to the main harbour. The grain shipments have their own dedicated facility. The boatmaster guides his vessel toward a canal that branches off from the main river, leading to the grain harbour. The canal is busy. Multiple boats are moving through it, all heading to or from the grain facility. The boatmaster joins this traffic, maintaining his position in the line of vessels. The canal is perhaps 50 yards wide here, lined with warehouses and docks on both sides. The grain harbor finally comes into view. It's large, crowded with vessels of all sizes. River boats like this one, bringing grain down from the delta. And beyond them, towering above the river boats, the massive sea-going grain freighters that will carry the wheat across the Mediterranean to Rome. The boat approaches an available dock. Sailors throw ropes to workers on the dock who secure them to bollards. The boat is pulled snug against the dock. After 6 days on the river, the journey from the field to Alexandria is complete. But the grain's travels are far from over. Next comes warehousing, inspecting, measuring, documenting, and eventually loading onto those massive sea-going ships. The process continues, step by patient step. The unloading doesn't begin immediately. The boat has arrived, yes, and it's tied securely to the dock. But there are procedures to follow first. Paperwork, inspections, schedules. Everything in Alexandria's grain operation moves according to careful protocols. The boatmaster gathers his documents, the loading certificates from the Upper Delta warehouse, his vessel's registration, his crew manifest. He steps off the boat onto the dock and makes his way to the harbour master's office. This is a substantial building near the waterfront, made of fired brick with a tile roof. Inside, multiple clerks work at tables, their writing implements and papyrus scrolls spread before them. The boatmaster waits his turn. There are other ship captains here as well, all waiting to register arrivals or departures. The room smells of ink, papyrus, and the sweat of men who've been working all day in the Mediterranean heat. Finally, a clerk beckons him forward. The clerk examines the documents carefully. He makes notations on a large papyrus ledger that lies open on his table. Boat name, the Naith. Boatmaster, Panhasi. Origin, Upper Delta Warehouse, Western District. Cargo, grain, 216 modii, already measured and certified. Expected quality, good. Destination, Rome, via sea transport. The clerk asks a few questions. Was the journey uneventful? Yes. Any damage to cargo? No. Any illness among the crew? No. The questions are routine, but they must be asked and answered for the record. The clerk makes more marks on his ledger. Then he calculates something on a counting board. An abacus with beads sliding on wires. The boat is assigned a position in the unloading queue. Number 23. The boat currently being unloaded is number 17. This means waiting. The boatmaster knows this. He's made this journey many times. Sometimes the wait is a day. Sometimes it's 3 days. It depends on how many boats are ahead of him, how quickly the warehouses can process the arriving grain, and how many workers are available. There's nothing to do but wait. He returns to his boat and informs his crew. They'll be here at least through tomorrow, probably longer. The crew settles in. Some go into the city to visit family or friends. Others remain on the boat, resting, repairing equipment, or simply watching the busy harbour. The harbour is fascinating if you take the time to observe it. Boats arriving and departing constantly, workers moving cargo, officials conducting inspections. The whole operation is like a complex dance, with dozens of participants all moving in coordination. 2 days pass. Finally, on the morning of the 3rd day, a harbour official appears at the boat. Number 23 is now being called. The unloading will begin this morning. The boatmaster rouses his crew. Workers arrive at the dock. These are professional stevedores, men who specialize in loading and unloading cargo. The cargo hatch is opened. The stevedores descend into the hold. In the darkness below, they begin hauling sacks up to the deck. Each sack is passed from hand to hand up through the hatch opening. On deck, more workers receive the sacks and pass them onto the dock. On the dock, the sacks are loaded onto wooden carts. Each cart can carry about 8 sacks, which is as much weight as a single donkey can reasonably pull. When a cart is fully loaded, a worker leads the donkey away from the dock toward one of the massive grain warehouses that line this section of the harbour. The unloading continues for several hours. Sack after sack, hand after hand. The pile in the boat's hold gradually diminishes. By midday, the boat is empty. The boatmaster signs documents confirming the unloading is complete. His part in this journey is finished. After a day's rest, he'll begin the journey back up the Nile to collect another load. But our grain continues its journey. The carts carrying our particular sacks arrive at Warehouse 7, one of the large storage facilities near the harbour. The warehouse is imposing, perhaps 100 feet long and 60 feet wide, with walls of fired brick rising 20 feet high. The roof is tile, designed to shed rain and provide insulation from the sun. The entrance is wide enough for a cart to pass through. The loaded carts are led inside one at a time. The interior is dim after the bright sunlight outside. High windows near the ceiling let in some light, but mostly the warehouse is shadowy, cool, quiet. The air smells strongly of grain, of dry wheat and dust. Sacks of grain are stacked everywhere, along the walls, in rows down the center. Some stacks are 6 sacks high, some 7 or 8. Between the stacks are narrow aisles, just wide enough for workers to pass through. The scale is impressive. Thousands upon thousands of modi of grain, all stored here. All part of Rome's food supply. Workers unload the carts, carrying the sacks to a designated area. This is where grain from the Delta region is currently being stored. Each sack is placed carefully on the growing stack. The workers move with practiced efficiency. They've done this countless times. A warehouse clerk follows the workers, making marks on a wax tablet. He's counting every sack, noting where it came from, where it's being stored. These records must be precise. Later, he'll transfer these notes from the wax tablet to papyrus scrolls, creating permanent records. Our grains sacks are placed in a stack against the western wall, the third row from the door. The clerk makes his notation. Row 3, position 7, 8 sacks, Delta region, quality, good. The sacks sit there, surrounded by hundreds of other similar sacks. Days pass. The grain sits in the warehouse, waiting. The warehouse master walks through the building every morning and every evening, inspecting. He's looking for problems. Any sacks showing signs of moisture, and any evidence of rodent activity, and any unusual odors that might indicate spoilage. The warehouse has systems to prevent problems. The high windows provide ventilation, allowing air to circulate even when the doors are closed. The brick walls provide insulation, keeping the interior cooler than the outside air. The tile roof is designed to prevent any rainwater from entering. And of course, there are the cats. 4 of them patrol this warehouse, lean and efficient predators. The warehouse master stops occasionally to examine a sack more closely. He touches the fabric, feeling for any dampness. He sniffs, checking for any off odors. He looks at the stack as a whole, making sure it's stable and properly aligned. Everything appears to be in order. The grain is safe. A week passes. Then 10 days. The grain continues to sit, undisturbed, except for the warehouse master's daily inspections. Outside, the harbor continues its busy operations. More boats arrive. More grain is unloaded. Some warehouses are getting quite full. Others have space. The administrators track all of this carefully, managing the flow of grain through the system. Meanwhile, preparations are being made for the next phase of the journey. Out in the harbor, a massive sea-going grain freighter is being readied. This ship is of a completely different scale than the riverboat. It's enormous, perhaps 180 feet long and 45 feet wide. The hull is deep, designed to carry immense amounts of cargo. The mast is as tall as a 5-story building, and the sail, when raised, is the size of a large house. The ship is called the Isis, named for the Egyptian goddess. It's been making the Alexandria to Rome run for 7 years. The captain is a Roman named Marcus Flavius. He's 48 years old, with weathered skin from years of sun and wind. He knows the Mediterranean like some men know their own fields. Every harbor, every seasonal wind pattern, every dangerous coast. Marcus is overseeing preparations for the voyage. The ship has just returned from Rome empty and needs maintenance before being loaded again. The crew scrubs the deck. The rigging is inspected. Every rope checked for wear. The sail is examined for any tears or weak spots. The hull is checked for any damage or excessive barnacle growth. Satisfied that the ship is seaworthy, Marcus meets with the harbour master to arrange loading. They consult various documents, manifests showing which warehouses have grain ready for transport, schedules showing which ships are loading when. It's determined that the Isis will load starting in 2 days. The cargo will come from multiple warehouses, including Warehouse 7. 2 days later, the loading process begins. This is an enormous undertaking. The Isis can carry 50,000 modii of grain. That's about 6,000 sacks. Moving this amount of cargo from warehouses to ship will take 3 full days of work. Workers form human chains from the warehouse doors to the ship's hold. Our grain sacks in Warehouse 7 are designated to be loaded on the 2nd day. Workers pull them from their stack, carry them through the warehouse out into the sunlight, across the dock and onto the ship. At the ship, the sacks are lowered into the hold by a simple crane system. A wooden beam extended over the hatch, with ropes and a pulley. Workers in the hold receive the sacks and position them carefully. The captain comes down regularly to supervise. Weight distribution is critical for a ship this size. Too much weight on one side creates a dangerous list. Weight must be balanced port to starboard, bow to stern. The hold is dark, hot, and close. The workers down there are sweating despite the relatively cool temperature. They work in shifts, spending an hour in the hold and then rotating out for a break in the fresh air. The work is demanding. Each sack weighs about 100 pounds and must be maneuvered into precise position. Sack after sack descends into the hold. The pile grows. Our particular sacks end up positioned midship, slightly to port, about 4 layers down from the top of the load. They're surrounded by hundreds of other sacks, all part of the massive cargo. By the end of the 3rd day of loading, the Isis is full. The hold is packed with grain. The ship sits noticeably lower in the water, its deep hull now truly deep. The final cargo hatch is sealed and covered with canvas lashed down tight. Captain Marcus reviews the paperwork with the harbour officials. The manifest lists the total cargo, the origin of the grain, the destination, the expected quality. Copies are made. One for the captain, one for Alexandria's records, one to be sent by fast courier to Ostia, announcing the ship's departure. It's evening now, too late to depart. The Isis will leave at dawn, assuming the weather is favourable. The crew settles in for one more night in port. Some spend it aboard ship. Others visit taverns or bathhouses in the city, enjoying their last night ashore for at least 2 weeks. Captain Marcus walks his ship one final time before sleeping. He checks the mooring lines, examines the furled sail, tests the steering oars. Everything is in order. Tomorrow, they sail for Rome. Dawn breaks over Alexandria. The sky is clear, showing the pale blue that promises a hot day to come. Captain Marcus rises early and checks the wind. It's blowing gently from the south. Not ideal for a northwestward journey, but acceptable. The Mediterranean in May is generally cooperative, and this wind, while not perfect, won't hinder them significantly. He calls the crew to action. There are 30 sailors aboard the Isis. A relatively large crew for even a large ship, but necessary given the size of the vessel and the length of the journey. The sailors move to their positions with practiced efficiency. These men have sailed together before. They know their roles. The mooring lines are cast off one by one. The Isis drifts away from the dock, pushed gently by the current and wind. Once clear of the dockside structures, oars are run out through the oarlocks on both sides of the ship. The crew begins rowing in long, steady strokes, moving the massive vessel out of the harbour. The rowing is not fast, but it's effective. The Isis is heavy, laden with all that grain, but the crew is strong and the oarwork is rhythmic. Stroke, lift, return, stroke, lift, return. The oars cut into the water and pull the ship forward incrementally, foot by foot, toward the open sea. Once past the harbour breakwater, the crew ships the oars and begins raising the great sail. This is a complex operation requiring coordination. The sail is enormous, perhaps 60 feet on each side, made of heavy linen panels sewn together. It takes a dozen men working together to raise it properly on its yard, a long wooden beam suspended from the mast. Slowly, the sail rises. The crew pulls on ropes, hand over hand, chanting to keep rhythm. The sail climbs higher, higher, until finally, it's fully raised and locked into position. Immediately, the wind catches it. The heavy linen billows out, filling with air. The ship lurches slightly as the wind begins to push it forward. Captain Marcus makes adjustments with the steering oars, feeling how the ship responds. A loaded grain ship handles differently than an empty one. It's slower to respond to the helm, more stable but also more sluggish. He makes mental notes, getting a feel for this particular load and how it affects the vessel's behavior. The Isis begins to move more steadily now, pushed by the south wind. It won't be the fastest crossing. With a following wind directly astern, they might make 100 miles a day. But with this angled wind, they'll be doing well to make 70 or 80 miles. Still, it's progress. The Mediterranean stretches out before them, the water a deep blue under the morning sun. The coastline of Egypt is visible off the port side. The plan is to follow the coast westward, staying within sight of land. This is safer than open ocean sailing. If dangerous weather appears, they can head for shore and find shelter. It's also easier for navigation. Captain Marcus knows this coastline well. Every landmark, every safe harbour. The crew settles into the routine of a voyage. Watches are established. Some men are on duty, watching the sail, monitoring the ship's behaviour, keeping lookout. Others are off duty, resting, eating, or performing light maintenance tasks. The watches rotate every 4 hours, ensuring everyone gets adequate rest. The morning passes peacefully. The sun climbs higher, and the temperature rises. The wind remains steady. The ISIS makes good progress, the coastline sliding by to port. Hills in the distance, the occasional cluster of buildings marking a town. Stretches of empty beach, more hills. Around midday, the crew eats. The ship doesn't stop. It simply continues under sail while the men eat in shifts. The food is simple but adequate. Hardtack, a twice-baked bread that's as hard as wood but keeps indefinitely. Dried fish, somewhat leathery from the preservation process. Olives from jars. Hard cheese that's been cut into portions. Wine mixed with water in a 2-to-1 ratio, making it more like flavoured water than actual wine. The men eat efficiently, sitting on the deck or on coils of rope. There's little conversation. The experienced sailors have learned to conserve energy during long voyages. Unnecessary talk is wasteful. They eat, they rest, they wait for their next watch. The afternoon proceeds much like the morning. Steady wind, steady progress. The ship rises and falls gently with the waves, which are running perhaps 3 or 4 feet high. Enough to give the vessel a rhythmic motion, but not enough to cause concern. The motion is almost soothing, a gentle rocking that some of the newer sailors find sleep-inducing. As the afternoon wanes and evening approaches, Captain Marcus begins looking for a suitable place to anchor for the night. He could sail through darkness. Some captains do. But he prefers not to with such a heavily loaded vessel. Too many risks. A sudden squall could appear. The ship could drift off course and approach dangerous shallows. Better to anchor in a safe spot and resume in the morning. He spots a suitable location, a bay with good holding ground for the anchor, protected from the prevailing winds. He gives orders, and the crew responds. The sail is lowered and furled carefully. The ship drifts into the bay under momentum. When the water depth is appropriate, the anchor is released. The anchor is massive. A large stone weighing several hundred pounds, carved with grooves so rope can be tied securely around it. It plunges into the water with a substantial splash and sinks quickly to the bottom. The rope pays out until the anchor hits the seafloor. Then the crew secures the rope to a heavy timber at the bow. The ship swings slowly on its anchor rope until it's facing into the wind and current. Dinner is prepared in a large pot over a brazier on deck. It's a simple stew. Dried fish rehydrated in water, with some lentils, onions, and herbs. It's hot and filling, which is what matters. The crew eats in shifts again, those on watch eating first, then those off watch. As darkness falls, most of the crew settles down to sleep. Some sleep on deck, wrapped in blankets. Others sleep in the small covered area at the stern. The night is mild, and sleeping under the stars is pleasant. The ship rocks gently on its anchor. The water laps against the hull with a soft, rhythmic sound. Above, the stars appear, impossibly numerous and bright without competition from city lights. A small watch remains awake through the night. 2 men rotating every few hours. They're not expecting trouble, but someone must stay alert in case conditions change. The watch sits quietly, listening to the water, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, occasionally checking that the anchor is holding and the ship isn't drifting. Morning comes gradually, the eastern sky lightening from black to deep blue to pale grey to pink and gold. The crew wakes, the brazier is lit again, and a simple breakfast is prepared. More hardtack, some dates, watered wine. As soon as there's enough light to see clearly, the anchor is raised. This is hard work. The anchor is heavy, and it must be pulled up from the sea floor entirely by muscle power. 6 men work the rope, pulling hand over hand in rhythm. Slowly, the anchor rises, dripping water and trailing bits of seaweed. Once the anchor is secured on deck, the sail is raised again. The ship begins moving, catching the morning breeze. Day 2 of the Mediterranean crossing has begun. The days develop a pattern: sail during daylight, anchor at night, eat simple mean meals, stand watch, sleep when off duty. The coastline continues to slide by. Egypt gives way to Libya, then to Cyrenaica. The landscape changes slightly, but the routine remains constant. On the 4th day, the wind picks up significantly. This is favorable. It's still blowing from the south, pushing the ship northward. The waves grow larger, now running perhaps 6 or 7 feet. The isis rises and falls more dramatically with each swell. But the motion is not dangerous, just more pronounced. Some of the newer crew members feel queasy from the increased motion, but the experienced sailors are unaffected. The stronger wind allows faster progress. Captain Marcus estimates they're covering nearly 90 miles this day, excellent for a loaded grain ship. The crew's spirits are good. At this rate, they'll reach Ostia in 10 or 11 days rather than the usual 12 to 14. On the 5th day, the wind moderates somewhat, returning to the steady but gentle breeze of the earlier days. The ship passes the coast of Crete, keeping the island visible to the south. The island's mountains are impressive, rising sharply from the sea. Other ships are visible now. The shipping lanes converge here, and it's common to see other vessels. A fishing boat, a merchant ship heading in the opposite direction, a naval trireme on patrol, its 3 banks of oars rising and falling in perfect unison. The isis continues on. More days pass. The routine continues. Sail, anchor, eat, sleep, sail again. It's monotonous, but pleasantly so. The crew has done this journey many times. They know what to expect. There are no surprises here, just the steady progression across the sea. On the 8th day, clouds begin to build on the northern horizon. Dark clouds, heavy with rain. Captain Marcus watches them carefully. This could develop into a storm, or it might just be passing squalls. He decides to continue, but tells the crew to be ready to reef the sail if conditions worsen. By mid-afternoon, rain begins. Not heavy at first, just a light drizzle. But the wind picks up, becoming gusty and erratic. Marcus orders the sail partially reefed, reduced in size by tying off sections of it. This reduces the ship's speed, but makes it more manageable in gusty winds. The rain increases to a steady downpour. The deck becomes slick. The crew covers certain areas with oiled canvas to protect equipment. The grain in the hold is safe. It's deep below deck, well protected from any rain. But the crew is soaked. There's no staying dry in rain like this. They simply endure it. The rain continues through the evening and into the night. The ship doesn't anchor. In these conditions, Captain Marcus wants to maintain sea room, staying well away from the coast where waves and wind could drive them onto rocks. The ship continues under reduced sail through the darkness, the crew taking shorter watches, everyone staying alert. By morning of the 9th day, the rain has diminished to occasional showers, and by midday, it stops entirely. The clouds break up, and sun appears. The crew is tired from the night of alertness, but relieved. The storm, such as it was, has passed. They hang wet clothing and blankets to dry in the sun and wind. The journey continues. On the 10th day, the coast of Sicily appears off the starboard side. This is a significant landmark. It means they're well over halfway to Ostia. The crew's mood improves. They'll be home soon, or at least to Ostia, which feels like home after 2 weeks at sea. On the 12th day, the Italian coast comes into view. That distinctive shoreline, those particular hills. Every sailor aboard recognizes it. Marcus adjusts course slightly, aiming for the mouth of the Tiber River. By afternoon, the harbour structures of Ostia are visible. The breakwaters, the lighthouse, the masts of dozens of ships. The Isis lowers its sail as it approaches the harbour entrance. Oars are run out again for precise manoeuvring. The ship rows slowly into the harbour, past other vessels, toward an assigned berth. Harbour workers throw ropes, which are caught and secured. Slowly, carefully, the Isis is pulled against the dock. After 12 days at sea, after crossing nearly 1,000 miles of Mediterranean water, the voyage is complete. But for the grain, the journey continues. Next comes unloading, warehousing again, and the final journey up the Tiber to Rome. The Isis sits at its berth in Ostia's massive harbour. The harbour is one of Rome's greatest engineering achievements. An artificial basin carved out and lined with massive stone blocks, protected by breakwaters that extend into the sea. Inside, the water is relatively calm, protected from the open Mediterranean. Dozens of ships are docked here or anchored in the deeper sections, and the activity is constant. Captain Marcus steps off his ship and makes his way to the harbour master's office. This building is larger and more elaborate than its counterpart in Alexandria. Ostia is closer to Rome, and the administrative requirements are correspondingly more complex. Inside, multiple rooms house different officials responsible for various aspects of the grain supply. Marcus presents his documents to a clerk. The manifest is examined carefully. The clerk checks it against an advance notice that arrived days earlier via a fast courier ship. Everything matches. The Isis, carrying 50,000 modi of grain from Alexandria, arrived as expected. The clerk makes notations in a large leather-bound ledger recording the arrival date, the cargo quantity, and the ship's name. The clerk then consults a scheduling board, a large wooden panel with pegs and markers showing which ships are being unloaded when. He calculates quickly using a small abacus. The Isis is assigned to begin unloading tomorrow morning. Marcus expected this. Ships rarely unload on their arrival day. There are procedures, inspections, and schedules to coordinate. Marcus returns to his ship to inform the crew. They'll spend tonight aboard ship, and then the unloading will begin. Some crew members ask permission to go into town for the evening. Marcus grants it. They've earned rest after 12 days at sea. Half the crew remains aboard. The other half heads into Ostia for the pleasures of solid ground taverns, bathhouses, and company. The next morning, as the sun rises over Ostia, the unloading process begins. This will take several days. The Isis holds an enormous amount of grain, and moving it all from ship to warehouse requires time and many hands. Workers arrive at the dock. These are professional stevedores, members of a guild that specializes in loading and unloading ships in Ostia. There are hundreds of such workers in Ostia. The grain trade employs more people here than any other industry. The cargo hatches are opened. Workers descend into the hold, where it's dark and hot despite the early hour. They begin hauling sacks up to the deck. The work is hard. Each sack weighs about 100 pounds. The workers are strong, but even so, they pace themselves. This is work that will continue all day and then resume tomorrow and the next day. Conservation of energy is important. On deck, other workers receive the sacks and pass them onto the dock. On the dock, the sacks are loaded onto carts, sturdier carts than those used in Alexandria, built specifically for moving heavy loads over Ostia's paved streets. Each cart can carry 10 sacks, pulled by 2 oxen working in tandem. When a cart is fully loaded, a driver leads the oxen away from the dock through Ostia's streets toward one of the massive storage warehouses. Ostia has dozens of these warehouses, each one larger and more sophisticated than the warehouses in Alexandria. The Romans have developed warehouse construction into an art form. Buildings designed with optimal ventilation, temperature control, and pest prevention. The cart, carrying our grains sacks, turns onto a main street, the oxen plodding steadily. The streets of Ostia are busy with similar carts, all moving grain from the harbour to the warehouses. This is what Ostia exists for: to receive Rome's grain supply and prepare it for transport up the Tiber. The cart arrives at Warehouse 12, a massive structure near the river docks. The building is made of fired brick and concrete, with a tile roof and multiple stories. The ground floor is the main storage area, while the upper floors house administrative offices and living quarters for the warehouse staff. The cart pulls up to the wide entrance. Workers approach and begin unloading the sacks. One by one, the sacks are carried inside and placed on growing stacks. A clerk follows with a wax tablet, making marks to track every sack. His records note: origin, Alexandria, via ship Isis. Arrival date, today's date. Quality, pending inspection. Storage location, Section B, Row 4. Our particular sacks end up in Section B, which is designated for grain from Egypt. The warehouse is organized by origin. Egyptian grain in Section B, African grain in Section C, Sicilian grain in Section A, and so on. This organization makes it easier to track and manage the supply. The unloading of the Isis continues for 3 days. Day after day, workers haul sacks from the hold to the deck, to the dock, to carts, to warehouses. It's repetitive work, but steady employment to tease. The stevedores earn good wages. The grain supply is too important for Rome to risk labor disputes. The workers are well compensated, which ensures a reliable workforce. By the end of the 3rd day, The Isis is empty. Captain Marcus signs documents confirming the unloading is complete and that the cargo was in good condition. He'll spend a few days in Ostia while his ship is cleaned and prepared for the return journey to Alexandria. Then the cycle will begin again. Sail to Egypt empty, load grain, sail to Ostia, unload, repeat. This is his life. Has been for years, will be for years more. Meanwhile, in warehouse 12 the grain sits. Days pass. The warehouse is cool inside, the thick brick walls providing excellent insulation against the summer heat that's beginning to build. The warehouse master walks through daily, conducting his inspections. Everything appears to be in order. After about a week, the grain is designated for river transport to Rome. The system in Ostia operates on a steady flow principle. Grain is constantly being moved up the Tiber, maintaining Rome's supply without overwhelming the city's own warehouse capacity. Our grain's time has come. Workers load the sacks onto carts again. The carts are pulled through Ostia's streets to the river docks. Here, a different kind of a vessel awaits. A river barge, specifically designed for the Tiber. These barges are flat-bottomed, sturdy, and designed to be towed rather than sailed. They're perhaps 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, with low sides and a flat deck. The sacks are loaded onto a barge chain. This one will carry about 80 sacks, as much as the barge can safely hold while still being towable. The sacks are arranged carefully, distributed to keep the barge balanced. Once loaded, the barge sits low in the water, heavy with its cargo. The tow line is attached. A thick rope running from the barge to a yoke worn by a team of oxen on the riverbank. There are 4 oxen for this load, working in pairs. They're strong animals, bred and trained specifically for this work. A driver walks alongside them with a long stick, though he rarely needs to use it. The oxen know the route and know their job. The barge begins its journey. The oxen lean into their yoke, and the tow line grows taut. Slowly, the barge begins to move, pulled upstream against the Tiber's current. The pace is slow, perhaps 2 miles per hour at best. The 15-mile journey from Ostia to Rome will take most of a day. The oxen plod along the riverbank path. This path is well maintained. It's crucial infrastructure for Rome's food supply. The path is wide enough for the oxen team, bordered by posts marking the edge. The driver walks beside the animals, occasionally calling out encouragement. Steady now, good pace, keep it steady. On the barge, several workers ride along. Their job is to use poles to keep the barge away from the riverbanks and to navigate around any obstacles, sandbars, half-submerged logs, shallow spots. The Tiber is not a particularly dangerous river, but it requires attention and skill to navigate safely. The morning passes slowly. The landscape along the Tiber is pastoral, fields on both sides of the river, with crops growing in neat rows. Small farms with their mud brick buildings and olive groves. The occasional villa, larger and more elegant, belonging to wealthy Romans who maintain country estates. Shepherd boys watching flocks of sheep that graze near the water. The barge passes other vessels moving in both directions. Some barges heading downstream, empty now, returning to Ostia for another load. Some barges heading upstream like ours, loaded with grain or other goods, small fishing boats. The occasional official vessel carrying government personnel. Around midday, the crew on the barge eats lunch. They don't stop. The barge continues moving while they eat. They sit on the sacks of grain, their legs dangling over the side, eating bread and cheese and dried figs. The motion of the barge is gentle, almost soothing. The sound of water against the hull. The steady tread of the oxen on the bank. The occasional call of a bird. The afternoon proceeds like the morning, steady progress. The oxen pull without complaint. The driver maintains the pace. The barge follows, drawn through the water. The landscape changes gradually as they approach Rome. The villas become more frequent, larger, more elaborate. The traffic on the river increases. The sense of approaching a great city becomes palpable. By late afternoon, buildings become visible ahead. Not ordinary buildings. These are massive structures, temples and public buildings, and the enormous warehouse complexes that serve Rome's riverport. The city proper lies beyond, stretching out in all directions. A vast urban expanse that houses over 1 million people. The barge approaches Rome's riverport. This is a major facility, with multiple docks extending into the river and massive warehouses lining the bank. The oxen are guided to a specific dock. Workers on the dock catch ropes thrown from the barge and secure the vessel. After a full day of travel, the journey from Ostia is complete. But the grain's journey isn't over yet. Tomorrow, it will be unloaded from the barge and moved into Rome's warehouse system. From there, it will begin the final phase: processing and distribution to Rome's population. The journey that began in an Egyptian field months ago is nearing its conclusion. Morning in Rome arrives with the sound of the city awakening. Even at dawn, Rome is never truly quiet. The sounds of carts moving through distant streets, merchants opening shops, slaves carrying water from public fountains, roosters crowing from private courtyards. Rome is too large, too densely populated, too constantly active to ever be silent. At the riverport, workers arrive as the sun breaks over the eastern hills. Our grain barge, tied up since yesterday afternoon, is ready to be unloaded. The workers approach the barge and begin hauling sacks onto the dock. Each sack is heavy, and the work is slow but steady. Sack by sack, the barge is emptied. On the dock, other workers load the sacks onto carts. These carts will transport the grain to a storage and processing facility. Rome has multiple such facilities scattered throughout the city, part of the vast infrastructure required to feed 1 million people. The cart carrying our particular sacks is pulled by 2 mules through Rome's streets. The streets are narrow, crowded, busy even at this early hour. The cart makes slow progress, occasionally having to stop to allow other traffic to pass. Other grain carts, carts carrying vegetables from nearby farms, wagons hauling building materials, sedan chairs carrying wealthy Romans, slaves carrying goods on their backs. The streets are a chaos of movement and sound. Finally, the cart arrives at a grain facility in the Subura district. This is one of Rome's densely populated working-class neighborhoods, home to tens of thousands of people living in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. The grain facility serves several of these neighborhoods. The facility consists of a large warehouse for storage, a processing area for cleaning and preparing grain, and a distribution center where citizens can collect their monthly rations. The complex is functional rather than beautiful. This is infrastructure, not architecture meant to impress. The cart pulls up to the warehouse entrance. Workers unload the sacks and carry them inside. A clerk records the arrival. The sacks are stacked with hundreds of others, all waiting to be processed and distributed. But first, the grain must be prepared. Remember, this is Emma wheat, still with its tough husks partially intact. Even though some processing was done in Egypt, more is required before the grain can be distributed for milling into flour. Workers bring sacks to the processing area. This is a large open courtyard with the workstations set up around the perimeter. Each station has a large stone mortar, a bowl carved into a stone block, and several wooden pestles. Workers stand at these stations and begin the tedious work of pounding. A worker pours grain into the mortar, filling it perhaps a third full. Then, grasping a pestle with both hands, they begin pounding. The pestle rises and falls, crushing against the grain. The sound is a rhythmic thumping that echoes across the courtyard. Thump, thump, thump. The pounding continues for several minutes for each batch. The worker lifts the pestle and brings it down forcefully, but not so hard as to shatter the grain kernels themselves. The goal is to crack the husks and loosen them from the grain, not to crush the grain into powder. It requires a practiced touch, a sense developed over time for exactly how hard to strike. After sufficient pounding, the grain is poured into a large flat basket. Then comes winnowing. The worker takes the basket outside to where there's a breeze. Fortunately, today has a light wind. They toss the grain into the air, letting the wind carry away the loosened husks, while the heavier grain kernels fall back into the basket. Toss. The grain arcs through the air. The husks blow away. The grain falls back. Toss again. More husks separate and blow away. After several tosses, the grain in the basket is visibly cleaner, the husks mostly removed. The cleaned grain is poured into storage containers. Then the worker starts again with a new batch, pound, winnow, pound, winnow. This process continues all day, every day. Batch after batch of grain is processed. It's monotonous work, but essential. The grain cannot be distributed until it's properly cleaned. Our grain goes through this process over the course of several days. Different workers handle different batches, but eventually, all of it is pounded and winnowed and deemed ready for distribution. The cleaned grain is measured out into smaller containers. Each container holds 5 modi, which is the standard monthly ration for one Roman citizen. The filled containers are moved to the distribution center. This is a relatively simple building with a counter at one end and storage areas behind it. The distribution operates on a schedule. Certain days for certain districts, ensuring manageable crowds and preventing the system from being overwhelmed. Tomorrow is a distribution day for this district. Citizens eligible for the grain dole will come to collect their monthly ration. Morning arrives. Even before the distribution center officially opens, a line has formed outside. Citizens waiting for their grain ration. The line includes men of all ages and conditions. Elderly men leaning on sticks. Young men in their prime. Middle-aged men showing the wear of hard labor. Some are citizens by birth. Others are freedmen, former slaves who gained citizenship. All are entitled to the grain dole. The distribution center opens. The line begins to move, slowly. One man at a time approaches the counter. He presents his tessera, a small token, usually made of pottery, stamped with his name and district. This token proves his eligibility for the grain dole. The clerk at the counter checks the token against a list. Everything in Rome is documented, tracked, managed by lists and records. The clerk finds the name, makes a mark indicating this month's ration has been claimed, and signals to a worker behind the counter. The worker measures out 5 modi of grain into the citizen's sack. The grain pours from the storage container with a soft rushing sound. The citizen feels the weight of the sack increase as it fills. 5 modi is about 40 pounds of grain. Heavy, but manageable. The citizen thanks the clerk, hoists the sack onto his shoulder and leaves. The next man in line steps forward. The process repeats. Token checked. Grain measured. Sack filled. Next person. Our grain is distributed over the course of the day. Different citizens receive different portions of what started as a single harvest in Egypt. One man receives a measure that includes some of our grain. His name is Gaius Valerius, though he's known simply as Gaius to his neighbors. Gaius is 35 years old, though he looks older. Life in Rome's crowded neighborhoods is hard on the body. He works as a warehouse laborer at one of the river docks. Ironic that he spends his days moving grain sacks and now carries a sack of grain for his own family. The work is steady but exhausting. His pay is modest but sufficient, supplemented by this monthly grain ration. He carries the sack through the streets to his home. Home is a 4th-floor apartment in an insula, a multi-story tenement building. The building houses dozens of families, stacked vertically in small apartments. Gaius's apartment consists of 2 rooms, about 400 square feet total. It's cramped for his family, himself, his wife Julia, and their 2 children. But it's home. The climb up 4 flights of stairs is difficult with the heavy sack. Gaius pauses twice to rest. Finally, he reaches his door. Inside, Julia is working on mending clothes. The children are playing in the corner with simple toys. A wooden horse and some clay marbles. Gaius sets the sack down with relief. His shoulder aches where the sack pressed against it. Julia comes to examine the grain. She'll be managing this ration over the next month, portioning it out day by day. She knows exactly how much they need each day. About 1.5 pounds of grain, which will be milled into flour and baked into bread. The sack is poured into a large ceramic storage jar that sits in the corner of their main room. The jar has a lid to keep out pests and moisture. This grain will sustain the family for the next month. Combined with Gaius's wages, which buy vegetables, olive oil, occasionally some fish or meat, and other necessities, the family will eat adequately, if not luxuriously. This scene repeats itself throughout Rome. Thousands of citizens collecting their grain ration. Thousands of families storing the grain in their homes. The distribution system operating smoothly, day after day, month after month. It's unremarkable. Routine. Absolutely essential. Rome could survive the loss of almost anything else, but not the loss of the grain supply. Several days have passed since Gaius brought home the grain ration. The large ceramic jar in the corner of the apartment has been opened each morning as Julia portions out that day's grain. This morning is like the others. Julia wakes early before the sun rises. The apartment is dark and quiet. Her husband and children are still sleeping. She moves quietly, not wanting to wake them yet. She opens the grain jar and scoops out about 1.5 pounds of grain. Today's allocation. The grain goes into a cloth bag she keeps specifically for trips to the mill. The bag is worn soft from years of use, stained from grain dust that never quite washes out. Julia wraps a shawl around her shoulders and leaves the apartment. The stairs are dark. There are no windows in the stairwell. She descends carefully, feeling for each step. Outside, the city is just beginning to wake. The sky is that pale grey that precedes sunrise. The street is mostly empty, though other women are also emerging from buildings, also carrying bags, also heading to the neighborhood mill. The mill is about 3 blocks away. As Julia walks, she's joined by other women from the neighborhood. They exchange morning greetings, brief conversations about family, the weather, nothing of great importance. These daily trips to the mill are a social routine as much as a practical necessity. The mill is located on the ground floor of a building at a street corner. It's already operating. The miller rises earlier than almost anyone, starting work while it's still dark. The mill is powered by a mule walking in a circle, attached to a beam that turns the upper millstone against the lower millstone. Julia joins the small queue of women waiting. The line moves steadily as each woman's grain is milled. The mule walks its endless circle. The stones grind together. The grain transforms into flour. When Julia's turn comes, she pours her grain into the hopper, a funnel-shaped container that feeds grain between the stones. The miller adjusts something, checking that the gap between the stones is correct. Too wide and the flour will be coarse. Too narrow, and the stones might crack the grain rather than grinding it smoothly. The mule continues its circle. The grain disappears into the hopper, pulled down between the stones by gravity. The stones grind together, crushing the grain into progressively finer particles. The flour emerges from the gap at the edge of the stones, falling into a collection box below. The sound is a constant rumbling, the stones grinding against each other, punctuated by the clop of the mule's hooves on the packed earth floor. The mill smells of grain dust and mule, and the slight burning smell that comes from stones grinding continuously. After several minutes, all of Julia's grain has been processed. The miller measures the flour into her cloth bag. There's less volume than when it was grain grinding compresses it. But the weight is the same, minus the small amount the miller keeps as his fee. Julia pays the miller 2 small copper coins. This is her daily expense, one of the few regular cash outlays the family has. The miller thanks her and turns to the next woman in line. Julia ties her bag closed and heads back home. The walk back is brightening now. The sun has just broken over the eastern hills, sending long shadows across the streets. Julia encounters more people now. Men heading to work, slaves carrying water jars, merchants opening shops. The city is fully awake. Back in the apartment, the family is stirring. Gaius is already up, getting ready for his day at the warehouse. The children are waking, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Julia sets down her bag of flour and begins the day's work. First, she needs to make bread. She pours most of the flour into a wide wooden bowl. She adds water from their water jar, pouring carefully, judging the amount by experience. Too much water and the dough will be sticky. Too little and it won't come together properly. She's been making bread since she was a girl, and her hands know the right consistency without conscious thought. She adds a small amount of salt, expensive, so used sparingly. And she adds a piece of saved dough from yesterday's batch, about the size of a walnut. This dough contains yeast from previous days, and it will help today's bread rise. Julia begins kneading. She pushes the dough away with the heels of her hands, folds it back over itself, turns it a quarter rotation, and pushes again. The motion is rhythmic, almost meditative. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The dough gradually changes texture, becoming smoother, more elastic. She kneads for perhaps 10 minutes. Her arms are strong from years of this work. The dough becomes smooth and cohesive, holding together well. She shapes it into a ball and places it in the bowl, covering it with a clean cloth. Now it needs to rise. Julia turns to other tasks while the dough rises. There are always tasks in a Roman household. Clothes need mending. The apartment needs sweeping. The children need supervision. She works steadily through the morning, periodically checking the dough. After a few hours, the dough has risen noticeably. It's perhaps half again as large as when she set it aside, the yeast having created tiny air bubbles throughout. She punches it down, pressing the air out, and shapes it into 2 round loaves. These are set aside to rise again, this time for a shorter period. By late morning, the loaves have risen again. They're ready for baking. But the apartment has no oven. The fire risk would be too great in a wooden building packed with families. Instead, Julia wraps the loaves in a cloth and carries them down the stairs. The neighborhood bakery is 2 blocks away. The baker operates a large clay oven heated by a wood fire. The oven is hot enough to bake multiple families' loaves simultaneously. This is a commercial service. Citizens bring their shaped loaves, pay a small fee, and the baker does the actual baking. The bakery is busy at this hour. Multiple women wait with their loaves. The baker works efficiently using a long wooden peel, a flat paddle with a very long handle, to slide loaves into the oven and retrieve finished ones. The oven's opening glows with heat. The temperature inside must be 500 degrees or more. Julia waits her turn. The bakery smells wonderful. The aroma of baking bread fills the street. That warm, yeasty, comforting smell that means food, means home, means security. Neighbors waiting in line chat quietly. Children play in the street outside, drawn by the smell. Finally, Julia's turn comes. She unwraps her loaves and hands them to the baker. He examines them briefly. He's checking their size and shape to estimate baking time, then slides them into the oven with his peel. The loaves join dozens of others already baking, all arranged across the oven floor. Julia pays her fee, a couple of copper coins, and waits. The baking takes about 45 minutes. She sits on a bench outside the bakery with other women, waiting. They talk about neighborhood news. Someone's son got married. Someone's daughter is sick. The landlord might raise the rent. The usual concerns of daily life. Inside the oven, the loaves are transforming. The heat causes the remaining yeast to produce a final burst of gas, making the loaves rise a bit more. The crust begins to form, turning from pale dough to golden brown to deep golden. The inside cooks through, the gluten protein setting, the starches gelatinizing, the bread is becoming bread. The baker calls Julia's name. Her loaves are ready. He uses his peel to retrieve them from the oven, the crust now a beautiful deep gold. The loaves are steaming, radiating heat. He sets them on a counter to cool for a moment. They're too hot to handle directly. Then he wraps them in Julia's cloth and hands them to her. Julia carries the hot loaves carefully, the heat penetrating the cloth and warming her hands. The walk home is quick. She's eager to get the bread to the table while it's still warm. The smell of fresh bread follows her through the streets. Back in the apartment, the family is waiting. It's midday now. Time for the main meal. Gaius has come home from his morning's work for this meal. The children are hungry, as children always are. Julia sets the loaves on the table. They're still steaming slightly, the crust crackling as it cools. She breaks one loaf open. The inside is soft, full of tiny air pockets, pale cream in color. The steam that escapes smells of wheat and yeast and warmth. She tears off pieces for each family member. Gaius gets the largest portion. He's doing heavy physical labor and needs the calories. The children get good-sized pieces. Julia takes a modest portion for herself. There's also some cheese on the table, some olives, a bit of onion, watered wine for Gaius and herself, plain water for the children. They eat. The bread is good. Not fancy, but good. Simple, filling, satisfying. The texture is slightly coarse from the emmer wheat, but no one minds. This is the bread they know, the bread they've always eaten. The crust cracks under their teeth. The soft interior squashes slightly when chewed. It tastes of wheat and salt and the faint tang of fermentation. This is the end of the grain's journey. From a field in Egypt, planted in November, harvested in March. Down the Nile on a riverboat, across the Mediterranean on a massive grain freighter. Up the Tiber on a barge pulled by oxen. Through Rome's distribution system. Milled in a neighborhood mill. Shaped by Julia's hands. Baked in a community oven. And now eaten by a working-class Roman family in their small apartment in the suburb. The grain has fulfilled its purpose. It has been transformed from seeds in soil to food on a table, providing nourishment, sustaining life. And tomorrow, the process will begin again. More grain will be milled. More bread will be baked. The routine continues, day after day feeding Rome. And so we've followed the grain, from beginning to end, from seed to bread, from an Egyptian field to a Roman table. It was a long journey, months in duration, hundreds of miles in distance. Dozens of hands touched this grain. Farmers, workers, sailors, clerks, millers, a mother making bread for her family. Each person performed their role, completing their small part of a vast system. The journey was also completely ordinary. This wasn't a special shipment. There was nothing unique about Hori's field, the boat on the Nile, the Isis crossing the Mediterranean, or Gaius's family eating bread in their apartment. This same process happened again and again. Countless fields, countless boats, countless families. And that's what's remarkable about it too. Not that it was extraordinary, but that it was so ordinary it hardly merited notice. The system functioned so reliably, so consistently, that ancient Romans took it for granted. Of course, there would be grain. Of course, the supply would continue. Of course, bread would be available. Behind this assumption was an enormous infrastructure. Bureaucrats tracking shipments, warehouse managers checking inventory, ship captains navigating the Mediterranean, workers loading and unloading countless tons of grain, officials distributing rations, millers grinding grain, bakers baking bread. All of these people performing their jobs, making the system work. The Annona, Rome's grain supply, was perhaps the empire's greatest logistical achievement. Not the roads, impressive as they were, not the aqueducts, remarkable as they were, but this, the ability to feed 1 million people in a single city, using grain grown hundreds of miles away, transported across sea and river, distributed efficiently to those who needed it. And it worked through routine, through the patient repetition of tasks, day after day, through the accumulated expertise of people who knew their jobs and did them well, through a bureaucratic system that tracked and managed and coordinated. There's something calming about understanding how this worked, about seeing the patience required, about recognizing that great achievements are often built not on dramatic moments but on countless small repeated actions. The farmer planting seed, the sailor pulling on a rope, the miller grinding grain, the mother kneading dough. We've moved slowly through this journey, step by step, at the pace it actually happened. We've waited when waiting was required. We've watched repetitive tasks repeat. We've followed the grain patiently from field to table. Perhaps this has helped you understand the ancient world a little better. Perhaps it's helped you relax. Perhaps you've already fallen asleep, which would be perfectly appropriate. This is the kind of history meant for nighttime, meant for quiet contemplation, meant for that drifting state between waking and sleeping. The grain's journey is complete, but the system continues. Tomorrow, more grain will be planted, more boats will sail, more bread will be baked. The routine that sustained Rome continues, day after day, season after season, year after year. Thank you for following along. Thank you for your patience with this slow, detailed journey. May you rest well. Good night.